Imagine a king who burned a church just to get a divorce, a queen who smiled at her executioner, a monk who cursed the crown and ended up in Parliament. This isn't a TV series, this is England. More precisely, England under a dynasty that ruled from the altar and the prison cell, the Tudors. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoy deep, slow-burning stories that smell of candles, blood, and iron. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? We're genuinely curious how far this story still reaches. Interested in the Tudors? Good. Then don't listen to the scribes. Listen to the ones who told them what to write. My name was Thomas Cromwell. I was a chancellor, a taxman, a traitor, the architect of Anglicanism, a blood-soaked bureaucrat, and the only man who lasted longer with Henry VIII than any of his wives. I held no noble title, I held leverage, and in this kingdom, survival belongs not to the saints, but to the timely useful. I was born the son of a blacksmith in Putney, a place even the postman avoided. As a boy, I ran away, lived in Genoa, fought in France, counted money in Flanders, and returned to England not as a beggar, but as someone who knew the price of everything, even kings. I once threw a banquet that cost £4,000, with actors dressed as griffins and trees that moved across the stage, all to distract from the fact we were dismantling monasteries behind the curtain. Cromwell counts everything, they said. Cromwell forgets nothing, and that's what scared them. I helped the king annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and tear England from Catholic Europe. I raised Anne Boleyn, then arranged her execution. I bent Parliament to its knees before a new church, then bent my own neck beneath the axe. Before he had me killed, Henry VIII said, "Cromwell was the most loyal servant I ever had." Funny, how many of his loyal men ended up headless? I saw it all. Henry VII, who came out of Bosworth like a bookkeeper with a sword. His granddaughter Elizabeth, who reigned like a powdered goddess. I watched kings fall in love, fall apart, fall into tombs beside the women they once adored or despised. I knew every draft in every corridor, not as a master, but as the shadow that fear walks in. And now I will tell you everything about a dynasty that began on a battlefield and ended in a bed with no heir, about thrones bought, broken, and buried, about queens who ruled for a week, about kings who killed not out of rage, but boredom. You think Game of Thrones is fiction? No, it's just the Tudors, without the dragons. He won the battle, but he lived like he'd only just lost it. Henry VII, the first Tudor on England's throne, and the first to sleep with a crown under his pillow and a dagger under the crown. Born in 1457 at Pembroke Castle, a fatherless child of a 13-year-old mother. Margaret Beaufort, not a mother, but a relic carved in iron. Pious, brilliant, and fanatical, like a saint with a will sharper than any sword. His path to the throne wasn't heroic. It was slippery, clever, and soaked in exile. He hid, he fled, he bargained in Brittany, dodged death twice, and re-emerged not as a prince, but as a claim. In 1485, he returned. Bosworth, the last battlefield of the Wars of the Roses, Richard III fell, screaming for a horse, and Henry took the crown. He came not as a hero, but as a solution, and he ruled not by charm, but by calculation. To secure the throne, he did something even the ballads still whisper about. He married Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, a union of roses, red of Lancaster, white of York. Together they birthed a myth, the Tudor Rose. But Henry, he wasn't a king of feasts or fox hunts. He was a king of ledgers. He taxed, he watched. He built a realm not of knights, but of clerks, courts, and codes. He revived the Star Chamber to judge those who thought themselves beyond judgment. He made spies a formal department, and every coin that passed through the realm he noticed, and yet he could dazzle. At his marriage feast, their wedding bed, carved from Baltic oak, painted with real ultramarine, a pigment more expensive than gold, stood as a symbol of a new dynasty. That same bed was lost to time, rediscovered centuries later in a hotel car park. Even Tudor glory sometimes sleeps in the shadows of suitcases, but behind the gold was grief. His eldest son, Prince Arthur, raised as the ideal heir, died at 15. Elizabeth followed soon after, and Henry was left with silence. He never remarried. He ordered hundreds of funeral masses. He made candles burn where hearts could not. Maybe that's why he raised his second son, Henry, differently, not as a clerk, but as a lion, and soon that lion would devour the world. The boy who was supposed to be a bishop and became a beast in a crown. I've seen many kings, but only one could be both a ballad's hero and a butcher with a crown. Henry VIII, the king England first adored and later feared in absolute silence. He took the throne in 1509, just 17 years old, tall, striking, radiant, a monarch forged from Renaissance gold. He could dance, compose, debate theology, and ride a war horse before breakfast. At first, he was England's spring in armor, a feast of hope and golden calves. His table, 5,000 calories a day, swan, pike, venison, even beaver tails. Hampton Court's kitchens fed over 1,200 mouths. It wasn't just monarchy. It was gluttony in velvet robes. And then, the fall. Literally. A tournament. Henry tried to pole vault over a barrier. The pole snapped. The king fell into the mud. His head sank. His weight pinned him. A servant pulled him out by the hair. He laughed it off. But something broke that day. Not in his body, but in his mind. It was the beginning of his body's decline and his mercy's decay. Catherine of Aragon, his first queen, Spanish, devout, proud. Dignity wrapped in silk and scripture, but no son. Henry never forgave empty cradles, even if the fault lay with him. Then he saw her, Anne Boleyn, dark, sharp, alluring. She made him want everything, her, freedom, divinity. That's when I entered the game. I, Cromwell, the blacksmith's son, sketching new empires. I rewrote the law. I bent Parliament to declare the king supreme head of the church. I took Rome out of England, word by word. Then I began to tear down the old world. Monasteries, centuries old, fell in weeks. Altars melted into coins, saints lost their niches, and monks lost their homes. Pray or flee. That was the new state religion. But Henry's flesh would not obey him. He grew massive. After a second fall during a joust, his leg rotted. It never healed. It leaked pus. His scent entered rooms before he did, and with the body decayed his patience. Anne Boleyn gave him no son, so he gave her a scaffold. She wore a white cap as the axe fell. He smiled. Sin, he once said, is just love with no peace. And I stood beside him. He trusted me, and I counted who still had their heads. He said he wanted a new church, but what he truly wanted was a heaven without God. They say wars are won with swords, lies. Empires are broken with paragraphs. And in that, I was an artist. When Henry VIII said, I will no longer kneel to a Roman master. I didn't draw a blade. I drew up statutes with ink, law, and quiet vengeance. First came the act in restraint of appeals. No Englishman could appeal to the Pope. The king was the highest court in the land. Then the submission of the clergy. Bishops bowed to the crown, not Rome. Not willingly, but under the weight of fines, charges of praemunire, and the silent threat of steel. The king is the sole head of the church, as far as Christ allows. A clever phrase, enough to ease a conscience, not enough to save a soul. I removed the Pope and replaced him with the king. By 1534, through the Act of Supremacy, Henry VIII was supreme head of the Church of England. Doubt it, and you disappeared. Every priest, every Sunday, in every pulpit said aloud, "There is no higher sovereign than King Henry. May God confirm it, for the Pope no longer can." And then we began to dismantle. Monasteries, with their 1,000-year-old stones, were pulled down like market stalls. Their gold went to the treasury, their relics to the furnace, their monks to silence. It wasn't reform. It was a crowned revolution. We didn't just change religion. We rewired the kingdom's soul. The king wanted freedom. What he got was absolutism. We exiled the Pope. We erased the monasteries. And when it seemed we had nothing left to destroy, we turned on each other. For the deadliest enemy of an empire is always the one standing closest to the throne. If you had walked into King Henry VIII's court at the height of his glory, you wouldn't be met with a throne. You'd be struck by a stage, not a theater stage, a stage of survival. Because His Majesty's court was a masquerade of silk, blood, and the scent of rotting wounds, hidden beneath roses, Hampton Court, marble, meat, mass, 1,200 mouths fed daily, hundreds of rooms, dozens of corridors, and in every one someone's fall. And me? I stood at the center of it all, not the star, no, but the man writing the script. Wolsey, Moore, Boleyn, the first act of the royal farce. Let me begin not with myself, but with those I buried. Politically, legally, or quite literally. Cardinal Wolsey, once untouchable. He held 2 thrones, Archbishop and First Minister. But when he failed to secure the king's annulment from Catherine of Aragon, he became expendable, charged with treason. He died not by axe, but broken. He was the first. I replaced him, and did what he could not. Thomas More, a martyr to some, to me, a man who chose faith over survival. He refused to swear the oath of supremacy. I warned him, I pleaded, he smiled, and walked to the scaffold like a saint. "I die the king's good servant, but God's first," he said. His head stood on London Bridge for 2 weeks. A reminder, piety does not protect you. Anne Boleyn, a comet's rise, a thunderous fall. She didn't seduce, she commanded. Anne led the king into breaking from Rome. He gave her a crown, but she gave no son. That was her sin. She bore only a daughter, Elizabeth. Whispers became accusations, incest, treason, sorcery. I assembled the case. No one needed proof, only fear. I oversaw her trial. She didn't flinch, even as the French executioner whispered how clean his blade would be. Her body was carried off in an arrow chest. Her name erased from prayer books. Anne of Cleves, painted alliance, annulled by scent, a diplomatic marriage to a German princess, alliance with Protestants. I arranged it with the best of intentions. Hans Holbein painted her, noble, poised, graceful. In person, she was real, too real. Henry, upon meeting her, said, "Thomas, she stinks. I cannot touch her." 6 months later, annulled. She was granted estates, the title King's beloved sister, and most importantly, she survived, the only wife to leave this court with her head and her fortune intact. Catherine Howard, young lust, led to the block niece to the Duke of Norfolk. Young, radiant, perfect balm for an aging, rotting king. But her past did not stay buried. Former lovers surfaced. She did not deny. Imprisoned in the tower, screamed, begged to see the king, but he no longer listened to anyone, only his own rotting heartbeat. She was executed like Anne. Her last words, "I die the Queen of England." Catherine Parr, the survivor, older, wiser, a widow. She was not passion, she was peace. She taught his children, nursed his wounds, dodged all traps. The only one I did not fear. By the time Catherine Parr entered his life, Henry was no longer the golden prince from Holbein's portraits. He was swollen, gasping, rotting. His leg, that old jousting wound, had turned septic. It oozed, it stank, it never healed. They packed it with herbs, resin, linen, and prayer. Still, it pulsed with pus and fury. He once vaulted walls. Now they lifted him with pulleys. His bed reinforced with iron to bear the weight of royal grandeur. But his wrath, that never decayed. He accused old friends of treason, had men tortured in the tower while he sat in candlelit chapels, mumbling psalms between spasms of rage. I saw him, candle in hand, weeping for his sins, only to sign a death warrant before the wax hit the floor. His court feared him more than they served him. They danced at his arrival, but always with one eye on the exit. And me? I lasted longer than most. Long enough to see masks slip, to hear wolves growl behind goblets of wine. I knew when to bow, when to strike, when to vanish into parchment and return with power in ink. I outlived Wolsey, outmaneuvered More. I served Henry faithfully, brilliantly, until I didn't. But that is another story. The Palace Carnival never ends. Only the dances change, 1 king, 6 queens. Love was never the goal, only power. And when the throne began to rot, everyone rushed to place their bets before the wheel stopped spinning. I survived the chaos because I created it. I knew which parchment to sign for mercy and which for death. I didn't believe in fate, only in control. But still, my time came. My crime. Too much loyalty. In 1540, I made the biggest gamble of my life. I arranged Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves, a German princess, a Protestant ally. Politically, brilliant. Personally, a disaster. The king met her, grimaced, and demanded a divorce before the first night. "She stinks," he said, and in that moment I knew I was no longer needed. The hunt began. The Duke of Norfolk, my old enemy, papist and predator, unsheathed his knives. His niece, Catherine Howard, was already circling the throne. And me? I became an obstacle. They arrested me mid-council meeting. No warning. I didn't even finish my sentence. There was no trial, just a bill of attainder, no witness, no defense. They threw me in the tower, stripped my chambers of books, letters, reformist maps. They didn't burn my body, they burned my ideas. 28th July 1540, Tower Hill, crowd, rain, mud. The executioner was drunk, his axe blunt. I climbed the scaffold, looking not into the faces of men, but into the eyes of death. My final words were simple. I die the king's servant, and at last God's, as I understood him. The axe came down, and everything I was became history. But not all stories end with the body, because I still saw the king's final year. In 1546, his mind crumbled like the ruins of a besieged wall. Suspicion, paranoia, fear. He signed papers daily without reading them. He stared at his hand, as if searching for power that no longer lived there. His truest servants dismissed, his safest allies hunted. He turned not to Scripture, but to amulets, alchemists, and astrologers. No faith, no force, no fortune could save him. His empire ran on fear, and once fear became routine, the throne began to rot. 1547. The end. In January 1547, the king slipped into a coma. His body swelled like a wineskin. The leg wound burst. The stench of death arrived before death itself. A few days before he died, he asked for psalms to be sung. When asked if he wanted a priest, he said nothing. Silence was his last prayer. He died at 55 and left behind a country torn between faith and fear. Women he had loved and executed, children born to live under his shadow, a corpse sealed in lead, and a name that would either be cursed or quoted. I was executed. Henry devoured by his own flesh. And England? Left in the hands of a child, a prince of 9, a church at war with itself, and a palace full of wolves. What follows is blood, not on swords, but on parchment. I remember when he was born, October 12th, 1537. The day Henry smiled without fear for the first time. His son was named Edward. His mother, Jane Seymour, the third queen, the only one who gave him an heir, and the only one who paid with her life. She died of fever days later. He is my phoenix, Henry said, a son born from the fire of loss. And truly there was fire, but not of rebirth. It consumed everything it touched. Henry had 3 children, Mary, from Catherine of Aragon, Elizabeth, from Anne Boleyn, Edward, from Jane Seymour. But the first 2, in the king's eyes, were shadows. Mary, because her mother's marriage was annulled. Elizabeth, because her mother had been executed for treason. Only Edward was a son, and legitimate. The throne was his, even in the cradle. All of this was for him, Henry said, and he killed for him, and prayed he would outlive the curse surrounding his birth. Henry is dead, and the country lies in the hands of a 9-year-old boy, a prince who still didn't understand why some palace doors locked from the inside, a prince who studied Greek, not politics. But law is law, and he was king. Edward was raised as the archangel of reformation. He knew the Psalms in Latin and English. He called the Pope an impostor. He read Calvin while other boys chased knights and fairy tales. He wasn't a toy of the church. He was its weapon. But a child with faith is not a king. Kings are made by adults, and broken by them too. At the helm stood his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, brother to Jane Seymour, a man with a prophet's face and a puppeteer's hand. Seymour crowned his nephew, but ruled in his place. He intensified the Reformation, closed monasteries, rewrote liturgies, introduced the Book of Common Prayer, declared clergy to be servants of the state, not vicars of Christ. What I was called a heretic for became law. I was dead. My ideas enthroned. England cracked. Peasants rose in revolt. Lands were sold off. Monasteries gutted. Taxes unbearable. Clerics, once monks, now drank in taverns. Church windows held more blank glass than saints. They rob us in God's name and the king's, wrote rebels in Devon. But the axe does not read paper. Somerset crushed them with force. Hundreds executed. Bodies hung from walls. Every edict bore the boy's name, but it was Seymour's voice. His brother, Thomas Seymour, wanted the throne for himself. He flirted with Princess Elizabeth, gathered mercenaries, even tried to abduct Edward from the palace. This isn't a kingdom, it's a tenement of treason. Thomas was executed, Somerset was removed, and the boy king was left alone, with a tin crown and growing awareness. His signature meant others' lives. In 1552, Edward began coughing blood, wasting, fever. No doctors, no prayers helped. He was 16, and he began to wonder who deserved the crown. Mary, his older sister, was Catholic. He feared she'd undo everything he'd done. So, under pressure from John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, he rewrote his will. The crown would not go to Tudor blood, but to his Protestant cousin, Jane Grey, raised on the Bible. He thought he was saving the church. He created a martyr. July 6, 1553, the king died, a 16-year-old monarch who ruled by pen and childlike faith. They laid him in a plain coffin. His reformation remained ink between lines. His will, a prelude to catastrophe. The next queen was meant to be Jane Grey, but within 9 days, she was locked in the tower. Because thrones aren't inherited by ink, they're seized by fire, and those who light it for others soon burn in it themselves. They saw her as a shadow, a daughter meant to vanish between chapters. When I was alive, she wasn't allowed near the palace. When I was dead, she returned as queen. Mary Tudor, Henry's eldest, Catholic, heretic, savior, tyrant. Depending on where you stood by the fire, when her brother died, a prince she never acknowledged as king, she raised her banner. Her rival was Jane Grey, young and innocent, a pawn for the Protestants. Jane was queen for 9 days. Then the Tower. Then the axe. Mary entered London in tears and fanfare. They hailed her as the Messiah of the old faith. And she truly believed God had placed the crown upon her head. She brought back the Mass, the Latin, the Pope's supremacy, and she began to burn. Those who once taught Protestant prayer now prayed inside flames. Bishops, priests, women, among them Hugh Latimer, an old friend of Reformation. He stood at the stake and said, "We shall this day light such a candle in England as I trust shall never be put out." And it wasn't, but it burned even those who lit it. Mary wasn't just a queen. She was a lonely child told her faith was sin. And now she held the power to punish those who laughed at her mother she loved. Philip of Spain, a cold prince with hot ambition. Their marriage symbolized the Catholic revival. But he never loved her. He arrived like a blade, married her, then left and took her peace with him. Her body swelled. Physicians said pregnancy, but only hope was growing inside her. Twice she believed she carried a child. Twice it proved delusion. What bloomed in her womb was only solitude. Her people began to murmur again. Protestants in hiding, nobles in schemes, Philip in Flanders. She sickened, her body like charred coal smoldering slowly. In 1558 she died. No heir, no husband, no Catholic restoration. Her will contained one wish, to be buried beside her mother, Catherine of Aragon, the woman Henry cast out. But she never did. They called her Bloody Mary because it's easier than understanding pain. I saw her as a child, hiding behind curtains when her father passed through the halls. I saw her crowned when her eyes no longer asked for anything. Faith can redeem, or it can burn. Next comes Elizabeth. Same blood, different fire. Not sword, not flame, but a mask of ice. That would reshape England forever. She was born under a sentence. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was already on her way to the Tower when Elizabeth took her first steps. Henry did not see her as a true heir. Her fate was to be a shadow on the wall, until a real king appeared. But all kings die, and shadows know how to wait. Mary is dead. The kingdom wavers between panic and hope, for next in line is Elizabeth, daughter of a heretic, a girl raised for exile, not for rule, and yet she wears the crown. They hailed her like sunrise after ash. All expected change. She remained silent. Her reign didn't begin with religion, but with theater. She knew how to arrive when it was too late to scream. Clad in white, eyes like blades, a voice as if Scripture itself chose to speak in a woman's tone. Around her, men jostling for influence, her fear to become another woman swallowed by the throne, her answer to never marry. "I am already married to England," she would say, and the world believed her. Plots began instantly. Catholics against her, the Pope against her, Spain against her. But she survived not by mercy, but by predator's instinct. Her spies sat in every embassy. Her intercepts read like novels of paranoia. Her enemies were jailed before they could say treason. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, Catholic heir. She kept imprisoned for 19 years. Mary wrote letters. Elizabeth gathered proof. When the moment came, she signed the warrant. Sisterhood crumbled beneath strategy. Then came the Spanish Armada. Philip of Spain, the same who shunned Mary Tudor, sent his fleet to destroy the heretic queen. Elizabeth rode to her troops in armor. "I may have the body of a weak woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king," she declared, and she won. The Armada fell apart. Storms, cannons, history, suddenly commanded by a woman. She ruled for 45 years, no husband, no heir. She became myth in her own time, a ruler who was not just power, but symbol. England turned outward to oceans and empire. Shakespeare wrote of ambition and death. The golden age was crafted around her shadow, and she aged. Her face hid behind powder, her teeth fell out, her closest friends died, but the crown she kept. In 1603, she lay down and did not rise again. No will, no final words, just silence. They buried her in Westminster beside Mary, two sisters, two Englands, Catholic and Protestant, flame and mask, and I am still here. History remembers not the ones who lived longest, but those who shifted the wind. This tale ends, but empires are just beginning. Subscribe if you want more slow, rich, unapologetically deep stories. And please leave a comment. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? We'd love to know where in the world you join us from.